I know a lot about being pissed off, but there's always something I can do about it. Live a life that the people you lost would be proud of. Live every day in their honor. You have a gift that can prevent others from feeling that same loss that you have. Live your life with that power. And you can be as pissed off as you like, doing that until you find grace. After the events of Yaira number 1, Yaira has discovered the key to finding Atlantis. We've had hints before of one of the things she seeks on Earth, and that is seeking Neptune. It's been hinted that Neptune is one of hers, the same species, the same struggle. Neptune found a home here on Earth, including him finding love, Cleto. And Cleto bore him many twin sons. This situation allows us to end up finding Yaira hunting. In this, we understand Neptune. Neptune's struggle mirrors Yaira's and asks some important questions of Yaira, of loss, plaguing her guilty conscience and making it a situation that spirals. Madness is the guarantee that follows Yaira. And without spoiling too much, Neptune is a perfect illustration of that. Neptune's inability to let go brings about horrors within the deep. But Yaira's not the only one struggling. No. Stephanya, who has been taken in by Alpha Core, is continuing her training, but in her young, confused mind boils a rage. A rage that she struggles to end up letting go. She continues her training, and though they say Yaira's dead, that she has no outlet, that she's trying to become more than just the street hood, now suddenly given incredible power. It's very clear she's very young, and even under the tutelage of Solari, Valdez, Braxwell, she still hasn't found her place amongst the group. Very much feeling more like a scolded child, spurring on her rage. Somebody needs to pay, and that's where we end up finding her. This rage that can make her lash out at friend or foe, doesn't matter. She just knows somebody has to pay. And of course, the one to gain that ire is Yaira. Maybe that's because there's a truth there she doesn't want to admit. I wonder. With Yaira being plagued of her past, does Stephanya feel the same? She has incredible power, but she can't bring back the dead. Her place in the world stripped away. Now trying to be hammered into a mold that doesn't quite fit. Sometimes anger is just the easier answer. Yaira's not alone in this, though. She ends up finding a companion, a ghost from her past actually coming back and onto our world, Yashua. A figure who is, well, very much akin to her, but we're unsure as to what capabilities. Yuasha is very much trying to bring a little bit of light to Yaira. It's difficult at times because he doesn't understand the world she now calls home. Instead, he wants to end up bringing her home. But Yaira won't go empty-handed. We've already had a hint in the first issue as to how bad things have gotten upon her home world. The fact that she is hunted as a traitor. That still echoes out in the stars. And in the stars, we end up finding a forgotten home. Joshua is a concerned fellow who wants to end up bringing his old friend back. Though I have to end up wondering, to what real purpose? Even after diving into the depths of Atlantis, having to fight and claw against its found inhabitants, and to reveal the truth of Neptune, Yaira is left in a compromised position. There is a detachment from reality that is happening to Yaira moment after moment. Can she really trust her own eyes now? Or her own past? It all ebbs and flows from waking to dreaming, and crashing like waves. The truth is that she may never know. But we know one thing for certain. The repercussions that have been brought upon at the end of Yaira 2 will echo and bring about a confrontation. 3 issues in the making. Let's talk a little bit about the book itself. The pages are still phenomenally drawn by Debora Carita. In fact, her style has actually started to loosen up now. Now, I'm unsure if this is specifically how they're inked, as I don't believe Debora does her own inks, but it's definitely showcasing something that I was hoping to see a little bit more of. One of my number one criticisms to the art style is how rigid that Yaira oftentimes appeared to be. The panels oftentimes depict these very, I don't know how else to describe it, almost like the entire thing doesn't flow, and yet, much like the waves Atlantis finds himself under, in fact, they're a perfect example of it, is when Debora's art is at its finest. The reveal of Neptune's temple, I would argue, is probably one of the finest panels that she's ever done. And so that oftentimes leads to a moment of frustration for me, when I can end up seeing these moments where things feel a lot more stiff, especially for a character who's thematically tied to the ocean. A lot of the art is incredibly beautiful, and almost in parallel to Bloodbruth, where the inks are the highlight. Michael's work is elevated. In Yaira, it almost feels as though we end up seeing Debora's art being weighed down by those inks. If you've actually seen some of Debora's art, just straight pencils, a lot of it has that flow. There are such beautiful panels in here. J. Brown is really good at being able to pull together colors in a very simplistic method. I don't mean bad simplistic, I mean right to the point. Still being able to keep most of the silhouette intact, and being able to end up playing around with contrasts, it works incredibly well to not let things get too muddled. I especially love it when I end up seeing the work he had done involving the giant squid, so to speak. Well, I guess I should say octopus, but don't want to spoil too much. As for the writing in here is pretty solid all around. The one thing I was afraid of, and this has always been probably my number one criticism to Jen and Sylvia's work, is that Jen and Sylvia, I'm not sure which of the two, if it's not both of them, have a tendency to insert flashbacks in places where it doesn't really help. To be clear, the scene with Joshua dreaming does end up helping a little bit, and later on, where we end up seeing Yaira claiming to needing to leave her home planet, we end up seeing moments where it works a lot better in Yaira 2 than I've seen it used in Yaira 1. One of the biggest issues has been oftentimes that these changes in pace, doing a flashback to kind of lead context into the current moment, typically breaks the flow of whatever's happening immediately. But in Yaira 2, it actually works a little bit better because they are using for instance, Joshua's dream sequence to remember his past. It helps us understand him and how he operates with Yaira. I kind of like that a bit, especially when it turns into a clean scene transition. But where it kind of always bothered me was when it would be, here's the situation's happening, here's a flashback, and now we're back to the situation happening. Which, while might work better in film, I feel really disrupts what the reader's experiencing when it comes to comics. Because now we're actually thinking of it as, here's a whole new section, and now we're going back and having to stitch together. When, much like the waves over Atlantis, there should be an ebb and flow to these things, and that is the one thing that tends to break me out of it. What I'm going to end up saying is more of a teenage Yaira. That flashback kind of ends up helping in that regard, if only to end up giving a little bit of context to why Yaira charges forward. It's almost like her fulfilling a promise to herself. Joshua is not a battle-hardened warrior like Yaira is. And so it ends up showcasing in how she ends up approaching any kind of foe that steps before her. Joshua is a little bit more timid of an individual, and because of that, we start to end up seeing this is not just a singular trait. This is not a change to. Yaira has always had this trait, though I would argue it's been enhanced on her years of, coming into Earth the way she has. Yaira 2 allows us a chance to build upon the foundations of Yaira 1, and does so with the expectations that were laid out. A highlight for me will always end up being Stephanya's place in the book. Stephanya is this little tie of our world and Yaira put together, and still finding her place, making it build to be a title fight worthy of the ages. One can only hope. I will admit, mild spoiler, I am looking forward to seeing what Ingrid is going to end up doing about it. After all, Stephanya did her dirty. And for some odd reason, I don't think Ingrid is the type to just take that kind of abuse lying down. Let us hope that our dear Stephanya doesn't end up pushing it too hard. Ingrid is about discipline, and presentation. Though, definitely one to understand grief. For some odd reason, I don't think she's about to put up with this. I'm expecting a lot of things from Yaira 3 later this year. And if you want to end up seeing where it's all heading, Yaira 2 is a hell of a way to pick it up. Well done to the crew working on Yaira 2. Thank you very much for your time on this. We look forward to end up seeing what comes next in Yaira 3 later this year.